I mean, it would be the end of thinking if everybody adopted the Christian sense of God, the rights divine from reason, a natural right, and then applied it to our. This is the part where I think that there's some play. You start with the omniscient, omnipresent, omnipowerful God, reason and natural rights, and you come to. But the next part, what type of regime is best to preserve that? Is it exclusively a constitutional republic? Or are there alternative forms of government that can operate under this umbrella of God, reason, natural right, and all the things that we've talked about from the founding, from Aristotle, even though he was polytheist, etc.? I still think he sees some of the same things. That's why we're still talking about him.
Oh, sure.
So,
Yeah.
what are there viable alternatives to the constitutional republic as devised in 1789 that respect back up the chain all the things that we're talking about?
Yeah, there can be. I mean, Jaffa is clear on this. You can have a just regime. You can have a regime that respects natural rights, and that's not necessarily a constitutional republic. You could, in theory, have a monarchy. The problem is, from the framers' point of view, from Jaffa's point of view, is all of them lapse even more quickly into problems, right? Aristocracy, especially. You know, you hear a lot of the younger guys on the distant right saying, "Oh, we want to go back to aristocracy, or we want to have some kind of Red Caesar or something." The problem is all the alternatives to constitutional democracy are even weaker. As problematic as it's turned out to be, that the American experiment seems to have sort of hit some rocks now after 200 years. Jaffa's argument, and I think the founder's argument, is the alternatives are even less likely to last. Aristocracy, especially, very quickly lapses into oligarchy. The United States was supposed to be a natural, not an artificial, a natural aristocracy, and we seem to have lapsed into an oligarchy. Monarchy, and I was talking a little bit earlier about the problem of divine right of kings, which you had under feudalism. That doesn't even last 2 or 3 generations. And you see this with the great wealthy plutocrats in American history, right? You might have some guy who's just, gangbusters, builds a great empire. And by the time you get to his grandchildren, they're just totally dissolute and useless, right? And it's the same thing with inherited monarchy. So, the alternatives to constitutional democracy are even more problematic, although in principle, you could have good alternatives.
The question I like to ask people is, where do you find virtue most likely, in the one, the few, or the many? What would Jaffa say?
Uh, I'm not sure I understand the question. I mean, you can find virtue in any human being. You mean political virtue?
Yeah, consistent enough virtue to enact a just regime, the one, the few, or the many. What's your winning
So I
bet there?
look, if you wanted to have, I mean, look, Aristotle says in principle, the absolutely best regime is the Pambasileia, the one all wise king. But even if you can find that, the problem is, what do you do with the succession problem, right? That's what I was just getting to. I mean, even if you could find someone who's virtuous enough and wise enough and restrained enough to rule without the encumbrances of law, just on the basis of his own wisdom, what do you do when he dies? I mean, do you just rejigger the whole system and move to something else? So that's
I,
one big problem with monarchy.
yeah, well, no doubt. There's problems there. There's problems in the oligarchy, as we're seeing right now, right? And then there's problems in pure democracy, which are very obvious to anyone who thinks about it for 2 seconds.
Right.
It is, man, this is pessimistic. Is the constitutional republic that was devised 1789 based on natural right and a belief in the rights given from God, the monotheistic, omniscient, omnipresent, omnipowerful God? If we created this thing and the wheels are already coming off, the car's like the doors like flying off, and we're going down the highway, and before all we are is like in a chair on like 4 wheels on the road, it feels like at this point. And if this was our best go, then man, sounds like we need to do a little bit more thinking. But people have been thinking about this for a long time. Who are we to think that we're going to come up with a better idea?
Well, okay. So one answer to that is and Jaffa talks about this, and I mentioned this a little bit in the book, is I mentioned that the founders created America before the introduction of this dogmatic idea of historicism, right? So Jaffa points out they didn't anticipate this problem, and so therefore they didn't plan for it. Now, in a way, that actually can make you a little bit more optimistic, right? Because now we do see this this bad modern theoretical idea, this philosophical error of historicism, and it came in very conscientiously. The whole progressive movement, sure you guys talked about this a little bit when you were in Claremont. The progressives very consciously brought in German historicism, the German idea of the state, and used it to attack American constitutionalism, right? So the regime didn't entirely lose the wheels and, all the stuff went flying off the car on its own. It's because it was conscientiously attacked by this philosophical dogma. So to the degree that we understand that now, or if the founders had understood it, you can respond to that, right? So you can, and if you understand how things work, how the car is supposed to function, right? If you understand the mechanics, and that goes back to Aristotle and these principles of political science. If you understand the principles and you understand how they got screwed up and attacked, that gives you some way to fix the problem, at least in theory, right?
Yeah, and I think that some of the more radical dissident right folks that are talking about a red Caesar aren't necessarily talking about to the return to the divine right of kings, but I think what they're acknowledging is that the administrative state, the bureaucratic technocracy that rules us by rule and fiat rather than by law and legislature, that system is so entrenched that you need somebody with enough power that they're able to just take it all down and sort of reset the clock on the constitutional republic that we have. I don't think, and I don't read every essay that Yarvin puts out. I do read a number of them. No, that dude writes more than I even think. Uh,
Yeah.
that he's saying that we need to have like a lifelong dictator who's kept alive through cryogenics and brain uploaded to the matrix so they can rule us in perpetuity. Although if you did find the right guy, that's not a terrible idea. I do think that's actually the foundation, right, of that series there. But
Oh, Asimov.
yeah, yeah, I think the rulers are cloned because they were found to be perfect, and they're cloned and just
Oh,
recycled over and over again. And so there was always three of them. There's like the kid that's just been born, the middle-aged man, and the man who's on his deathbed, and it's the same genes, and they just sit together and they rule together. It's a interesting concept, but um, which would actually be some of the solution to some of the things that we're talking about if you do find that one perfect guy, right? But of course, there's no one who's perfect and no system is perfect. And Aristotle laid out the cycle and shows that we're just in the process, right? So if nothing, if human nature stays the same, but time marches on, then that cycle that Aristotle pointed out is probably going to happen, which means that the democracy or representative democracy that we had is probably devolving into some form of tyranny, and then we're going to reset the whole clock. That sounds like a really rough time to live through. I'm not super excited about that, but I do consider these ideas and do think about them quite a bit. And the the time scale we're working on here, I don't know that all this is going to happen in the next 3 or 4 or 5 years, but it does feel like we're accelerating a little bit. Do you get that sense that things are accelerating and that some
oh,
of these problems we're addressing are becoming just so evident that they can't even be ignored anymore?
yeah. I mean, I think the acceleration is just mind-boggling. Every week, I see what the Biden administration is doing, and I'm astonished. I was a Soviet studies strategic IR person as an undergrad in the 80s. And so I studied a little about the Soviet Union and how it worked and the way they use propaganda. And I keep thinking we're living under the old Soviet Union between the propaganda and the idea that you're representing anti-party evolution, anti-revolutionary elements. Therefore, you lose all your privileges as a citizen. I mean, the divisiveness, the propaganda, the politicization of our police and our justice system and the military. Yeah, it's accelerating at an alarming rate. I mean, every week that goes by, I think it's astounding.